Antelope Freeway 1 mile. Antelope Freeway 1/2 mile. Antelope Freeway 1/4 mile. Antelope Freeway 1/8 mile. Antelope Freeway 1/16 mile. Antelope Freeway 1/32 mile. Antelope Freeway 1/64 mile. Antelope Freeway 1/128 mile. Antelope Freeway 1/256 mile. Antelope Freeway 1/512 mile. We've just passed Antelope Freeway. This is Dale Matthews. I run a website called badcounty.com, and I attempt once a week to tell you the background about some stories that are happening in our area that you're not going to hear about from anybody else. This week, the story is about the state of Oregon versus James Rossi. It's a court case where James Rossi, he likes to just call himself Rossi, may end up in jail because of a fender bender in a bank parking lot. What? Okay. So let's go at it first from the point of view of the police dispatch that sends out a motorcycle policeman to a fender bender in a bank parking lot. And when the motorcycle policeman arrives, there's a lady that's waiting for him there, still in the proper place where this fender bender happened. And she says to the policeman, the guy in front of me, Jim Rossi, he ran into my vehicle, and her name is Nancy Bowers, and then he took off. Well, as the motorcycle policeman, you're going to lean over and look to see what seems to be wrong with her vehicle, probably first. Is she okay? Yes, I'm okay. And she's a little upset, she's a little angry and everything, but it looks like it's a dent in her license plate. And this is about it. But the guy is not there. He's gone. So she took a photograph using her cell phone of the guy who left the scene. Now, as a motorcycle policeman and you're investigating a mere fender bender, when you're involved in this kind of accident, you're not really supposed to leave the scene. Now, if you're on the side of a highway or you're in some kind of place where there might be danger, it's understandable where you might that you might not just stay in one place where you might be in further danger, but you'd get off the side of the road and wait for the police or whatever. James Rossi didn't do that. The thing that you need to know about Rossi is he's hard to get along with. He's willing to admit he is hard to get along with. I find it hard to get along with him. All of his friends find it hard to get along with him. But does he deserve to go to prison because he's hard to get along with? Now, there's no objective evidence about what happened. It's possible that she came roaring up behind him in a fit of rage. She ran into the back of his truck, which had one of those ball attachments to the back of it to pull a trailer. That's possible. It's possible, in the realm of possibilities, that Jim Rossi backed his truck up into her because he was in a bad mood and then felt like leaving. It's possible. As the motorcycle policeman on the spot, you're not going to know. So he says to this lady, did he give you any kind of identification? She said, yes, he gave me his business card. And he threw it at me, and he was upset. According to Jim Rossi later, he did give her his business card. And he says he showed her his driver's license, but he wasn't going to leave it with her. And he showed her his proof of insurance. So what are the things you're supposed to do? You're supposed to stay there. You're supposed to share your driver's license, your insurance information, your registration, license, registration, etc. and you're supposed to wait for the police. He didn't feel like waiting for the police. Well, now it looks like it might be, because he left, it could be a hit and run. It could end up being felony hit and run if the situation is just right or just wrong. Really, for a fender bender in a bank parking lot. So we find out later from the court case. By the way, you can see the court case if you go to badcounty.com and look for this video with the title here about Oregon versus James Rossi, and I'll put a little note at the bottom of the text for it where you can go and see, if you want to see, the entire trial. It's kind of long. So this happened a couple of years ago, and there's more details than you probably want to know. So the policeman is now faced with a dilemma. He only has Nancy Bowers and her rendition of this. So obviously you're going to look to see if there's somebody else that has another version or independent evidence, because it's just Nancy Bowers and what she says, and eventually you're going to get more information from Jim Rossi and what he says. And so who's at fault? There's no way to know, and unfortunately now there's never any way that you're going to know, because the evidence has been erased. So the policeman goes over to one of the bank tellers on the outside. He's talking to him through the little window that faces outside. And he said, "Did you see any of this that happened?" And the bank teller there said, "No, I didn't." And he goes back to the lady in the car, and he said, "Well, listen, I wonder if there's any bank footage, if there's any footage from the cameras." And she said, "Oh, I already asked them that," and they said no. So this is to the best of my knowledge. I'm sitting in the courtroom, and I hope I got this right, but the policeman decided to take her word for it. What? And not go check back with the bank. Really? Now, things aren't looking quite right to me here. I mean, I don't know. All I know about Jim Rossi is he's hard to get along with. But that doesn't seem quite right, as it turns out. There was footage. They could have looked at it. But it's erased by now. What? All right. So the policeman decides to call Jim Rossi, because he's got his business card. He calls Jim Rossi. Jim answers the phone, and because Rossi's a little hard to get along with, he doesn't really feel like talking about it. Oh, this isn't good. And later on, all of Rossi's friends said, "What are you, a dope? Talk with the policeman. You can solve this problem." "Oh, she just wants insurance money." "Well, okay, that's his worldview. And the policeman is just harassing me." That's also part of his worldview. It's better, Jim. Hello, Jim. It's better to talk with the policeman. He says, "I don't have to if I don't want to." Yeah, well, this is part of your problem that's stemming here. And the policeman says on the stand later, "I made it clear to him that you must stay in this place." So he says to Jim Rossi, "Get in your vehicle and get back over here so we can talk here." Jim Rossi says, "No, I'm not going to be leaving my house, getting back in my vehicle, driving all the way back over to the bank just to talk to you there." And the phone conversation ends not on a very positive note. So then the police officer testifies that he gets more information from Nancy Bauer, and there's some kind of pictures that are taken and etc. There's a little confusion about who took what pictures, and he gets a chance to see the picture that she took of Jim Rossi leaning against his vehicle. I've seen the picture, leaning against his vehicle before he left. Okay. So then the policeman decides that he's going to go over to Jim Rossi's house. Now, wait a minute. You must come back to the scene or you're in trouble. Why is the policeman going over to Jim Rossi's house? He was asked, "Were you going over there to arrest him?" "No, I was going over there to work things out." Work things out? Wait a minute. Wait a minute now. The rule is he must come back to the bank. So why again are you going over to his house? Now, Jim Rossi didn't think to ask this guy this question on the stand. I'm sitting there and, I'm not a lawyer, but I mean, really, I'm videotaping this. And I'm thinking, ask him. I'm not going to speak up. The judge already has me on a tight leash. Sit in the back of the room. Don't move at all. You can't even pan the camera. Okay, whatever. It makes it a little harder to see what's going on as people are walking back and forth. But I'm thinking, ask him this question. Now, wait a minute. Why doesn't he have a lawyer? Roll back to the beginning of the trial. The judge says to Jim Rossi, listen, I'm giving you a warning here. You really need to have a lawyer. And Jim Rossi goes into a short little speech about lawyers and how useless they are in this life. Well, it's not like I completely disagree with him, but keep in mind, Jim Rossi is hard to get along with. Now, the first person he had chosen as his lawyer is Jack Swift. Well, I've talked to you about Jack Swift before, and actually I don't really blame Jim Rossi for firing Jack Swift. I wouldn't want him even in the building if it was my case. So Jim decides he's going to defend himself. He's been in and out of various legal difficulties in the past, and doesn't have a high opinion of judges, lawyers, policemen, and etc., and he'll tell you at length his opinion about that. It hasn't made him a friend to the legal system in Josephine County or even on the state level. He's hard to get along with. So he decides to defend himself. So he doesn't think to ask the policeman, wait a second, why did you take Nancy Bauer's word for it that there was no footage? Second, why didn't James Rossi, I want to ask him this question, why didn't you ask for the footage? Well, see, according to Jim Rossi, when he hired Jack Swift, Jack never went to go get the footage while it still existed. What? Now, before we get all over Jim Rossi and Jack Swift, where's the state? Where's the district attorney's office? Why didn't they get the footage? The footage is there. It might show you exactly what happened. It wouldn't explain why he left the scene and didn't want to come back. We already have that explanation. He's hard to get along with. But it would explain who did what to whom. Nobody got the footage. Now, it's a little bit understandable for a motorcycle policeman who's going to show up at fender benders all over town. Who knows how many there might be every day. And you're not always going to think, oh, this could turn into a big federal case or something, or a state case that's going to be very important. Someone could end up going to jail. That doesn't happen. Well, it is in this case. So maybe he wouldn't think right away about the footage. The bank manager might give it some thought, but didn't. Okay, it's not really in their responsibility to be sure that the footage is preserved. We will never know what really happened. So we might as well put that out of our minds. We're never going to know who ran into who. Whether it was crazy one person, crazy another person, or easy to get along with, hard to get, well, we'll never know. Well, there's another kind of record that banks keep, but I'm going to get to that in a minute. So now they're in the courtroom, and the other, just before the jury's brought in, the judge gives Jim Rossi another suggestion of what to do. He says, I suggest that you don't bring up the first trial. If you bring up the first trial, then the prosecution can also bring up the first trial. I'm thinking, first trial? First trial? What, this is the second trial on the same subject? Yes. Second trial. What happened to the first trial? Well, as it turns out, according to the information that was shared at this trial, the prosecution did not share all the information, which they're required to do, with Jim Rossi's team, or with Jim, in the first trial, and the first trial was thrown out. What? Yes, this is now the second time he sat through a trial. For a fender bender? Really? This is a lot of money to be spent. 2 trials, 2 complete trials with the jury and the judge had to be brought in from out of the county. What? Look, if you're in the DA's office and you screwed up, and you're going to have to start all over again for a fender bender, it'd really be better to stop the hemorrhaging of the money and let this case go. It's not like you're letting somebody go that is a rapist or somebody letting someone go that's a child molester or something. We're talking about a fender bender in a bank parking lot. And you've screwed up. Stop spending money. Don't go back again for another trial. So when I'm looking at just the expenditure of the money, I'm sort of understanding a little bit about Rossi. Yes, hard to get along with. But this is a scandal, in my opinion, that they're spending more money, and their goal now is to put the guy in jail. Really? Hit and run? Maybe even felony hit and run? What? So, I'm at the trial, and they bring in somebody about handling of the evidence. How was the evidence handled? How are these pictures taken? Well, the police are all in an uproar because they don't know who took their own pictures. What? Yeah, well, Nancy Bauer took one of the pictures, and then they're not quite sure who took the other picture. Guys, it's understandable that if you're a motorcycle cop and you're there for a fender bender, maybe you're not going to use exactly the same kind of tight procedures as you would for a murder. Rossi's sort of being treated that way, but okay, so lady comes out, she starts talking about this photograph that they have of Rossi leaning against the side of the truck. He's motionless. This is not video. He's just leaning there. And you don't see his legs as a blur or anything, so it looks like, you can't really tell. Maybe he's just using the side of his own truck as a way to walk along to get into, or to rush along, or to mosey along to get to his the cab of his truck. But she says, well, we have this picture of you fleeing the scene. Really? Fleeing the scene? You can't tell by looking at this photograph whether he's standing there taking in a nice day. This is not Jim Rossi. But you can't tell that he's even moving when this picture is taken. So what's this about fleeing the scene? Now I'm starting to develop a little bit of a bias because, one, the prosecution, this is now the second time they've had to do this, or they say they've had to do it because they screwed up, and now we've got a witness that's saying, not a witness, we've got, yes, a witness, but a bureaucratic witness that says, well, this picture shows him fleeing the scene. If I was Rossi, or if he had a lawyer, I'd say, wait a minute, I object to that. This picture doesn't show him fleeing the scene. What are you saying? Well, nobody did that. So it suddenly occurs to me while I'm sitting there that there's some things that are happening here with the police that just aren't right. I mean, 2 policemen have been sitting there for the larger part of a day waiting to testify because they've been called as witnesses by Rossi to what happened in the bank parking lot, something to do with their procedure. One of them comes up and sits down on the witness stand and then says, well, I wasn't there at all. Well, apparently James Rossi has called the wrong guy, that police officer wasn't there. You mean to tell me that this guy has sat there all day waiting to be called, knowing that he wasn't there, and nobody in the DA's office could say to Jim Rossi, Jim, this is the wrong guy. Now, he could be out there fighting crime. He could be out there arresting people for fender benders or whatever it is that they do. He's going to sit in a courtroom most of the day waiting just to say 3 or 4 words, I wasn't there. Now it's really starting to sort of irritate me. One is, poor Jim doesn't know to ask the right questions or present them in the right way. The judge is trying to tell Jim, and he even says while the jury is in the room, that's not the way to ask to approach the witness. Apparently we don't, Judge, may I approach the witness? We've all heard this. Well, apparently that's not the way it works here. Judge, may I hand a document to the bailiff who will take it to the witness? And the judge keeps telling Jim Rossi, he tells him a couple of times that that's the way he's supposed to do this. So it's a little bit like that old game show Jeopardy. Oh, maybe it's still on, where you've got to always, what is Abraham Lincoln, or who was it? You've got to pose it as a question. or however that program actually works. I probably got it backwards. So Jim Rossi keeps saying, well, I'd like to give him something. And the judge is now starting to say, not going to be allowed. And Jim Rossi's, well, why won't it be allowed? And then but the judge isn't explaining, because he's already explained to him. The thing is that Jim is just a regular guy, and now he's getting frustrated because he knows what he wants to say, but he can't remember how to say it. All right, he's hard to get along with. Does he need to go to jail? Because he can't remember exactly the right way to say it. So if the judge has to explain it to the guy 20 times, why are we spending this kind of money? Okay, yeah, he's screwing up as he's doing it. But here's a situation where both sides are screwing up. And I promised I'd say something to you about this. So you try to see if you can get there before I do. You're in a bank parking lot. Your best evidence, which is videotape, is soon to be erased forever. So one would hope that there might be somebody else, an objective witness, that might have seen some of what happened. The big question is, did he leave and not show her the information? But we don't know that, because we could have seen that on videotape. What is the other thing that bank parking lots, that banks do at your drive-thru, besides shoot videotape of you? That is not their main business. That just happens to do that. What's the number one thing that all banks are going to keep track of, no matter what, and they're going to have it forever? Years and years, 20 years, 40 years, they're going to have it. You know the answer. They keep track of exactly what time you were there, how much money you deposited. Of course they do. And they're not going to be getting rid of that. They're not going to erase that. So wouldn't you think that somebody from either side, the DA's office, these are highly paid professionals. They're state certified. Jim Rossi or some lawyer working with him would think, now wait a minute, the bank's going to be able to tell us exactly, precisely, who was there in that bank parking lot at the same time. Contemporary with this. Maybe there's a witness that we can go find. Nobody thinks to ask this? As a result of all this, because of the instructions that the judge gave the jury, they felt they had no choice, because they have no evidence that Jim Rossi showed those things to that lady, the things that you're supposed to show, license, registration, proof of insurance, and etc., because they have no evidence that he did that. Of course, they have no evidence that he didn't do it. They found him guilty of not doing the right thing. And the testimony by the policeman that he was going to go over and work it out with him, but why would he do that? Because you can't go work it out with him, because the law says you have to come back to the scene, but apparently that's not really the law, because he was going to go work it out with him. Because he's hard to get along with, Jim Rossi is almost certain to go to jail. That's a lot of money, because they don't like the guy. We just passed Antelope Freeway.